Good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad that you are able to join us today. Welcome to the 2023 ConnectEd Spring Webinar Series, Spring Forward. This spring, we're really interested in exploring ways that we can know our students more deeply and create some learning spaces where they can really thrive. It's a time for us to look forward and feel renewed. So we're so glad that you are joining us here for this conversation today and hope that you'll join us for some of the others coming up later on this month. I am Kendra Lomax. I'm here on behalf of ConnectEd, the College of Education's Professional Learning and Community Learning Office. And it is my pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Maxine Alloway, my friend and colleague. Maxine is a former elementary classroom teacher who now works with our aspiring elementary school teachers here at UW. She teaches both elementary literacy methods courses as well as adult learning courses. And today she's really going to bring those two areas of expertise together and invite us into thinking together with her about how they might fit together. So as we get going, as you're listening, please feel free to make use of the chat window. You can add ideas and questions that are occurring to you as you're thinking and listening. And then Maxine will also plan to keep a couple of minutes at the end for any questions that you might have for her. So if you want to add any of those to the Q&A feature in the toolbar, we'll keep track of those and save a few minutes towards the end. One last thing, if you like to use closed captioning, you can find the Show Captions button in the toolbar and select that feature. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Maxine.
Thanks, Kendra. Hi, everybody. My name, sorry, I'm getting switching over the slides. There we go. As Kendra said, my name is Maxine, and we are going to talk today about providing teachers support to implement equity-focused phonics instruction. And so there's really, in many ways, two goals of our session together. One is related to equity-focused phonics instruction, and the other really focused on how do we help teachers learn. And so we'll be kind of holding both of those as we go through the session. It will be as interactive as a webinar session can be, so you may want to get a piece of paper or something to take notes on. There'll be a few moments where we'll do some silent note-taking. And as Kendra said, also, please feel free to write in the chat or use the Q&A feature to, again, make this as interactive as possible, because we know that people learn best through interactions with one another. So with that introduction, I would love to just take a moment to find out kind of who's with us today. So if you could just write in the chat your name, your role in education, and one thing you'd like to get out of today's session. What made you decide to come today? So an example, my name is Maxine. I'm a teacher educator at the University of Washington, and I'm hoping to learn about all of you in today's session. So take a moment and just write in the chat, name, role, and one thing you'd like to get out of today's session. I'm going to give another moment just for people to write in the chat. Thanks, Colleen. Excellent. Thanks, Eve. I suspect we'll have more trickling in. Thanks, Patricia. Excellent. That is helpful. As we go, I will try to definitely include more about thinking about phonics for older students, because I see we've got some middle school and a high school teacher here. And so please, again, use the chat. If I forget to kind of share about that, add, please. Yeah, excellent. All right. If you haven't yet written in the chat, you can add that anytime, but we'll go ahead and get moving. All right. Excellent. So again, the goals of this session is really for you all to reflect on how you and those you work with think and learn about teaching phonics. And then to have a model for explicit phonics instruction that can equitably support beginning readers. And then the second piece, understand a framework known as the learning cycle that supports adult learning. And so kind of the second half of our session, our time to get today, we will talk about adult learning as well. And finally, we know the importance of joy in learning. And so I hope that you enjoy this time and enjoy the reflecting on how to support students in their phonics instruction. So with that, always important to start with the learner. So we're going to start with you and just take maybe 2 minutes to think about the questions. Why do teachers teach phonics? What do you know about how do teachers teach phonics? And what's the relationship between phonics instruction and equity? You're welcome to write in the chat if you want to put your thoughts out to all of us. You also can just jot down ideas for yourself in any language or pictures. You can also just use this moment to walk around a little bit and think about these questions. But we're going to take just 2 minutes. I'm going to set a timer and we're going to take 2 minutes to think about these questions. Again, you're welcome to write ideas in the chat if you would like to. Oops. Take about 10 more seconds. All right, hold on to these ideas. Hopefully they'll help you make connections as we get into things. I want to share 4 key beliefs about phonics instruction that really forms the foundation of what we're doing when we teach phonics. The first one is that phonics instruction is intended to help students communicate and understand the communication of others. This is why we teach phonics. And if we hold on to the idea that it's about communication, that helps us to be kind of open-minded, that helps us to be aware of, right? I'll have novice teachers often say to me like, well, what do I do if the student pronounces it wrong? We'll go back to this point. Are they able to communicate their ideas? Are they understanding what the author is communicating? Great. Then who cares how it's pronounced? It's about communication. And so holding that to any time we're thinking about phonics instruction, what we're thinking about is communication. Communication in different audiences, in different settings, but it's always about communication. The second thing is that there is a trajectory of phonics development that helps explain why some words are often easier or harder for students to learn to read, even though not every student progresses along that trajectory. So we have seen a trajectory. This is where some of the science of reading ideas come from, that there is research that says, okay, oftentimes CVC words like cat, consonant, vowel, consonant, cat, map, sit, are easier for new readers, beginning readers to read than words that have a magic E, like bake, or words that have a diphthong, ow or oi. Shout is a harder word to read than sit. But that doesn't mean that every individual child will be able to read shout, sit, but not shout, for example. We don't go, every child doesn't follow this trajectory in a lockstep way. So there is a trajectory that's helpful for teachers to know, thinking about the gaps that someone mentioned in the chat, right? It's helpful to see, oh, that's a gap. Oh, usually that gets developed earlier. Okay, I'm going to address it a little bit differently than if it's a skill that, oh, it makes sense the student's just starting to learn that skill, right? And then we can think about what we know about kids' home languages, because that's going to change the trajectory based on the sounds that kids are hearing at home, based on the ways in which sounds are put together in languages. If students read in another language, that's going to affect this trajectory. So it's not to say that there isn't a trajectory or the trajectory is not useful. It is. And we have to know that kids are not going to follow this trajectory the exact same way as one another. So the next thing is that not all words in English are decodable, because English is a meld of many different languages. So you often hear people say, oh, English is so hard. Oh, English doesn't make any sense. English is stupid. And there are lots of patterns that are not consistent. There are languages out there that are far more consistent phonetically than English is. And the reason is because there are so many words adapted and adopted from other languages. And so holding that and remembering that's why there are words that are spelled differently, that's why things don't always follow those patterns, I think is really helpful for teachers to keep in mind as they're thinking about, how do I I'm creating a diverse setting for my students where there's lots of different cultures and languages. And look, English is from all of these different languages as well. And so there's a connection there. And then finally, phonics often needs to be taught in an explicit yet engaging manner, grounded in real reading. So we do see that it's important to have explicit instruction. Reading in English is not as intuitive as things like number sense. A child might have number sense, and our goal is to help kids understand how to work with numbers in an efficient and effective manner. There's no reason that an E should make a word go from tap to cape. That's just how, like, there's no real reason. It's just a pattern that we have that's been created. And so we need to have explicit instruction in phonics. It has to be engaging so that kids are wanting to learn and engage. And it has to be grounded in real reading. I've seen lots of lessons where teachers will teach an explicit phonics lesson, and they'll read all these words out of context and then send the kids off to go back to whatever else they were reading. Or they'll send them off with a like, oh, here, you could read this, but they don't do anything with that reading. But if reading is about communication and reading is about making sense of the world and understanding things, then we have to marry phonics and comprehension, real reading. So as we teach a phonics skill, let's practice that skill, but let's practice it while we're reading and making sense of something. We're not reading to practice the skill, we're reading to learn something and to find something out. Even more important with our older students who are maybe learning phonics not at a kindergarten, first grade level, but learning later on in their educational trajectory. Even more important that we're engaging them in, let's learn, let's read something, to talk about it, to think about it. Let's engage someone's intellect. I'm going to pause for just a second just to see if there's any questions about any of these kind of 4 underlying principles of phonics instruction. I'll keep an eye out for the chat and the Q&A to see if people have questions. Oh, great. I see a chat. All right, let's keep going. One way to think about a particular phonics lesson, I'm going to present kind of a framework for a lesson. This doesn't mean that every lesson has to follow this exact format. Many of you probably are working in schools or districts where there is a curriculum. I know somebody's going to be adopting a new curriculum. And this is a way to think conceptually about what are we doing in a phonics lesson so that we can then look at a curriculum and think about, okay, wait, why might the creators of this curriculum have that? Oh, if I need to shorten it, where might I cut? Oh, this is designed for 6-year-olds. I'm doing this with 16-year-olds. Any of those modifications require kind of a conceptual understanding of what you're doing. So that's what this framework is. When we're teaching phonics, we're teaching how to read a particular phonetic pattern that students have not yet learned to read. So it's focused on one pattern. Maybe we've done an assessment to try to get a sense of where on the trajectory might that child be. Where are they struggling as a reader? And so we're going to hook them in like any lesson that we do, right? Here's what you're learning. Here's why you're learning it. Maybe this is a fun thing to get you excited about it. I love working with novices who come up with all sorts of fun and creative ways to hook students in to a lesson. And then there's a phonemic awareness check. That's hearing the sounds of language without necessarily seeing the letters. So phonemic awareness is all about the sounds. And if you don't hear the difference between sounds, it's going to be harder to read those words. I taught in Israel towards the beginning of my career, and my students could not hear the difference between cap, cop, and cup. Like the cap that you wear on your head, the cup that you drink from, and cop as in police officer. They heard those 3 words the same. So I couldn't in my instruction do a distinction between the ah and the ah because they heard the words the same. They would then use context to communicate, to understand the words. And so I had to teach phonics a little differently to my Hebrew speakers that were learning English than I might to an English only speaker. So that phonemic awareness check does a great job of kind of telling us as the teacher, where might we need to take our instruction? And then we model. Modeling in education, we use this word in so many different ways to mean so many different things. In this context, it's model as in think aloud. So this is where I'm saying, oh, I see the C, I know that makes a k. And then I see an ah, which says ah, and a T, which says t, k, act, right? I'm telling my thinking. Now, the reality is I see those 3 letters and I know it's the word cat. So I, as the teacher, then have to break down, like, what would I be thinking if it wasn't automatic yet? And so the modeling in this case is really that thinking aloud. And then the guided practice, where kids have a chance to practice reading words with that pattern out of context. Maybe they're doing some word work and spelling the words. They're doing interactive things with the words. Lots of discussion in the literacy world around pseudo words, the words that are kind of made up. And there's some benefits for some kids because they're fun and interesting and I can make it up. And then it can also be really hard for someone who's learning English as an additional language because every word sounds like a pseudo word. And so there's pros and cons and something to think about in whatever context you're working with or the teachers that you're teaching are working with. Would the pseudo words be a way to engage your students, or would it be super confusing because there's so many words that are real, are words that might have meaning to some people and not to others? So just a little thing to be thinking about. And then you get into your application, your independent practice, right? So this is the standard I do, we do, you do, but specific to phonics. This is where that real reading comes in. Decodable books are really hard to find, culturally responsive, with good representation books for sure out there that are decodable, that practice a particular phonetic skills. Teachers can create their own, but having some form of authentic or as authentic as possible reading is really important. So kids are practicing the skill for the purpose that it serves. They're practicing reading an author's ideas. They're not just practicing reading a list of words. And then, like all lessons, closing it in some way. So hopefully this structure is helpful to just think about kind of how do we structure a phonics lesson? All of the details then get filled in based on the curriculum you're using, the specific phonics skill you're teaching, and the students that you're working with. Oh, that's a great question. Are there tech tools available to help students practice their phonics? There definitely are all websites and things. I don't have one off the top of my head that I can tell you like, that's a really good go-to. But I can take down your name and send you an email with some, because I don't, like I said, I don't have them off the top of my head, but there definitely are all sorts of tech tools that are available. And I'll think about for high schoolers as well. All right, that's the phonics piece. So just again, want to pause, see if there's any additional questions before we move into kind of the other half of what I've planned for today. So I'm just going to pause for just a moment. All right. Like I said, feel free to add into the chat if you've got questions as we go. We're going to talk now, shift a little bit to thinking about how do we think about teachers, teaching teachers as adult learners? And so it might be that we're teaching teachers how to teach phonics, but you also might be teaching teachers in some other context. So this is kind of a little bit of a pivot to keep thinking about the work, some of the work that we do in ConnectEd kind of broadly. So I want to ground us in adult learning theory, principles of andragogy. So andragogy, this word here, is similar to pedagogy, but related to adults instead of pedagogy, which is actually related to children. There's lots of overlap you'll see as I describe the principles of andragogy. The theorist who is kind of identified with this is named Malcolm Knowles. And he is no longer alive, but a group of people took his ideas and this is an edited edition to a book that he wrote. So Knowles came up with 6 principles of andragogy. As I go through these will probably make sense to you. And again, most of them are absolutely applicable for children as well, just maybe more so with adults, or maybe in a slightly different way. The first is the learners need to know. Adults need to know, what are they learning, for what purpose, why, right? Who, what, where, why. And that need needs to be kind of satisfied for adults. The idea of because I said so gets less effective as time goes on. That doesn't work so well for adults. Self-directed learning. Adults like to feel kind of in control of their own learning. The more that adults have choice and control and are really directing themselves. If you think about the teachers we work with, they're choosing their own life most of the day, right? And so most of the day in their lives outside of school. And so at work, how can we ensure that people feel like there's some sort of self-direction? Prior experiences of the learner. We know the importance of prior experience for kids, even more so for adults who have such broad, vast experiences to build on. We need to build on prior experiences. With adults, it can get tricky because sometimes we have to deal with some unlearning, right? If adults have learned something and that's their prior knowledge, we have to kind of unlearn that. And so it's a big part of learning when we think about adult learning. Readiness to learn, right? Our lives are busy. We have lots going on. We have to be ready to learn something in order to really learn it. Hopefully you all feel like you are ready to learn what we're here today for. The next one is orientation to learning and problem solving. Adults, again, connected to this idea that adults have busy lives, a lot going on, tend to be very focused on the task, right? What am I going to have to do with this? Why are we learning? This connects back to the why are we learning this, right? Having it be task and problem oriented, not just conceptual. Important for kids, right? We get asked all the time, is this going to be on the test? Even more so for adults, why should I be doing this? And finally, motivation to learn. Adults tend to be more intrinsically motivated. So they want to learn because they want to feel a sense of satisfaction. They want to feel volition and valued. Extrinsic rewards for sure still have a role. I don't know that any of us would do what we do if we weren't getting paid at all. There's still some extrinsic motivation for sure, but adults tend to be fairly internally motivated. So those are Knowles's ideas. Hopefully, as you are thinking about this, you're thinking about work you do to help teachers learn. It could be yourself or your colleagues or teachers you work with. And you're thinking about how the work you do aligns to these principles. I love these principles. They make sense to me. They feel robust. And I can't rattle them off, right? Like if I didn't have these in front of me, these 6 in front of me, I would probably maybe get 4 out of the 6. And so over time, I've created my own mnemonic to help remember and to help synthesize the ideas from Knowles. And so I call it the ABCs of adult learning. Applicable, right? Adults need to see how it can be applied because there has to be that motivation and some layer of intrinsic motivation. Control, adults need to feel some control and choice over their work. And then the S for ABCs stands for experiences. Learning has to draw on adults' experiences. I'm going to present a framework and then give you another moment to just think about how this work these ideas and these conceptions connect with your own work. But I'm going to give one more framework. So we've got the principles of adult learning, both from Knowles and then my synthesis of it. And then we have the learning cycle, which has been designed. It started here at UW a few years ago. And it's a great way to think about how do we help people learn? And I think it's particularly important because that allows us to kind of have a framework and not go based on our implicit biases. It allows us to implement learning opportunities for adults in an equitable way. Because again, we might say like, oh, here's my hunch. Oh, I think they can do this, but they can do that. And so a framework like the learning cycle is really helpful so that we are thinking about learning on a conceptual level and on an equitable level and not just kind of going with our gut, and which could lead to acting on implicit biases. So I'm going to take a moment to just explain the learning cycle. As always, feel free to interrupt with things in the chat or the Q&A. The learning cycle starts with the introduce. That in many ways is what I just did about phonics. I introduced phonics instruction and explicit phonics instruction and a framework for that. So you've got your introduce, the thing you're trying to teach. The middle, the center here is the instructional activity. Then you've got a prepare. This is really where we give teachers a chance to get ready for whatever they are going to be doing. So in phonics instruction, it might be lesson planning together. but giving some time to prepare, to then enact, actually trying on whatever the instructional activity is with children, getting a chance to do those things, and coming back and analyzing, reflecting and analyzing what happened, why did that happen? So I want to give us another moment to, oops, there are my images. I want to give us, oh, those are the images of ways that this connects to andragogy, right? So our introduce, before you start doing that, right, is where we present the who, what, where, when. The prepare is where we ensure that teachers are ready for whatever it is that they're learning. The enact is the problem solving. That's if we're learning this thing, we're going to do it. And the analyze is the building and reflecting on prior experiences. And so this learning cycle really aligns nicely with Knowles's ideas of adult learning theory. So now I want to give us just another, we'll take 2 minutes again to think about the work that you do supporting teachers or supporting yourself and your learning. And what does that look like in your context? What are your introduce, your prepare, your enact, your analyze? It could be in learning phonics. It could also be in another way in which you engage with teachers to learn. So take 2 minutes to write for yourself. If you're willing to share something in the chat, it'd be great to feel like we're in community with one another around these ideas. So you're welcome to write in the chat if you feel comfortable doing so. We'll take 2 minutes, we'll take a minute and a half to just think about these ideas. We'll take about 30 more seconds. You're welcome to write in the chat how your work connects to this learning cycle. All right. Now that you've had time to kind of connect it to your own prior experiences and your own knowledge, we'll take a moment to think about how this might relate if you were teaching phonics and phonics instruction. And we've got a great example, another great example in the chat of how, of how to take a strategy and take students through, take teachers through the cycle. Thank you. So with our explicit phonics instruction, right, I explained it to you. I might also give a video to really introduce the idea, if that was kind of our main focus of learning this. Then there'd be some co-planning and some rehearsing. So let's try it on without children yet. Try on what phonics instruction might look like and sound like, even with experienced teachers, right? Trying it on to then enact. And it might be teachers go and teach and record themselves. It might be that we go like we do in learning labs. ConnectEd, one of our models of professional development, are learning labs. And so we might kind of all go and watch a teacher in real time do a phonics lesson. Some sort of teaching, observing, opening up our practice to one another. and then coming back, discussing how it went, really thinking about what students did in the lesson, watching videos of the lesson. This again is a great framework to think about, how do we support teachers in learning? It might be differentiation. We want to think about how do we differentiate our instruction, and we're going to go through this learning cycle together as a school community, thinking about that as the instructional activity, for example. It could be phonics instruction. What's great is you can use this with in so many different ways. So that was lots of information to kind of take in at one time. And so I would love to just hear some ideas if you're, again, willing to write in the chat. If you're near somewhere where you can type something in, great. As a result of this session, how will you support teachers to implement, and the teacher might be yourself, to implement equity-focused phonics instruction? Is there a takeaway that you want to share with the group, if you're able to, in the chat, of something, a takeaway that you want to be holding on to as you continue your work? I'll pause to see if there's any questions, or if anyone's willing to share a takeaway. Yeah, thank you. If phonics is communication, then all of the things that kids come to us with is going to influence their communication. And so it may not be that they're not understanding the phonetics or they're not reading something, but how are they communicating? So true. Thank you. I hope that you found this both informative as well as enjoyable. These images are all kind of representations of joy, both children thinking about what's the work we do to help foster joy in children, and what's the work that we do to help foster joy in adults. Thank you so much. If you've got questions, I'm going to turn it over to Kendra in just a moment, but again, if you've got questions, I am happy to stay on and answer questions about either strand of what we talked about today, our phonics and phonics instruction, or adult learning and supporting adult learning and how we do that. I'm happy to continue conversations with any of you or answer any questions you may have, but I'm going to turn it over to Kendra.
Thank you, Maxine. We really appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon, and thank you all for joining us. I was wondering, Maxine, I know there was a question in the Q&A about tech tools, and you had offered to find some for us. I'm wondering if there are any other kinds of resources, either about kind of phonics instruction, or kind of your ideas around andragogy or the learning cycle that would be good for folks to know about. And if so, I'm happy to put together a follow-up email and I can share those with folks. But if there's any off the top of your head.
Oh, I feel like there's so many. I don't know that I have
Quick question.
Here's a go-to, because so much of the work I do is kind of a synthesis across different ideas. So I'll keep thinking, but I don't have a good go-to perfect resource.
Okay. she's going to think more about it for us and send us some. So I would look for that in your inbox, everyone. I'll go ahead and send a follow-up email. Let me share my screen. So again, thank you, Maxine. We super appreciate you taking some time with us. And we hope that the rest of you will join us for another webinar. We've got more coming up the rest of May. So Mondays and Wednesdays. We've got a session pretty much every Monday and Wednesday through May. So this Wednesday, Dr. Jamie Cho is going to help us think about our grading practices and how we can bring more justice to the way we think about grading students and giving them feedback and inviting them to be more active participants in that experience with us. And then throughout the month of May, we've got a lot more sessions. If you're interested in this idea of the learning cycle, I'll be doing another one connected to math. So kind of a parallel or similar ideas to what Maxine has shared with us today, but we'll think about more in the context of elementary mathematics. So if you're folks that work across context or content areas, I hope that you will join for that one as well. Let's see. We do also have some other things that I want to let you know about coming up this summer. So we'll have courses. Oh, one thing that we were hoping to get from you all is feedback about if there was one focus area related to elementary literacy that you would like to see Maxine put together a course on this summer. We're inviting feedback on that right now, and then that will be available in the coming weeks. So if there's something that you're dying to learn more about, or if you really want to dig deeper into the ideas from tonight, let us know in the chat or by my follow-up email. You're welcome to respond. Just let us know what it is you're hoping to learn about. We'll also have some around mathematics, teacher leadership, media literacy, and thinking more about ethics and kind of dismantling stereotypes. So lots to look forward to. I will put the link in the chat to where you can learn more about those. And then if you are feeling like this was really interesting and you're wanting to dig in more, the work that ConnectEd does is around professional development in lots of contexts. So we do webinars like this, but we also do clock hour courses like I just talked about for this summer, workshops, smaller events. And then if you're interested in kind of partnering with us ongoing, we also work with schools and districts and kind of tailor to your particular learning interests and context and what you're trying to accomplish. So again, I'll put that information in the chat, and we are looking forward to continuing to learn with you in lots of different ways. So thank you all for joining again tonight. I'll put those links in the chat here, and then we'll see you again next time. There we go. Maxine, did you want any last word?
No, I just thank everyone for being here.
All right, well, take care. We'll stick around if anyone has questions. Thank you all.